disaster. As was mentioned by Tyler, I worked through with a lot of help from some old great miners, Larry Hoffman, he's here, but was certainly one of them, Floyd Bosser, Dave Kneebone, and a number of other people. And the problem with the coroner's inquest, 600 pages of eyewitness testimony, is that it looks like it's in English, but it's really not. Because it's all this mining slang that can be impossible to understand. And it also reflects all the specific places within the mine. And so if you don't know how the mines were worked out, where the different drifts were, where the C switch was, or the B switch, or this, you have no idea where people were. So it goes hand in hand. So I was able, by a lot of work, to match the descriptions, pretty much everything in the testimony, into the map structure, and then derive where people went, what they were thinking at different places, and pretty much the whole time frame. And that's how the book was written. It was written not as a footnoted history, because I was doing that at first, and I realized that I was not doing justice to the men and women involved, because obviously just the huge emotion, all the intensity, and so it was not presented by the historical treatment. And so I threw that away, and I did what I have been practicing for 30 or so years before that. For that entire 35-year period before that, I was both a scientist, but then also my alter ego was as a expedition whitewater kayaker all around the world, doing big first descents on huge rivers and remote places and wilderness. And so when you make a film with something like that, or you write a story about it, the whole purpose is to take the audience, and probably a lot of them aren't kayakers in that case, and put them in the boat with you and take them along. And so with that in mind, that's the way I wrote the book, is to put everybody right there in the mine, shoulder to shoulder with the men, and above with the women and the men struggling with this thing. And it was extremely difficult to write because of the emotionality of the thing, but I think if you read it, you will understand that incident better than you ever could otherwise. So what I'm doing today is to mostly show visuals about what it looks like, because I'm sure, even the people who've grown up here and read everything, when you get up there on the memorial and say, okay, now, where's the Speculator shaft? It's like, well, there is a shaft there, it's a subsidence hole. You can't see it from the memorial. You can wave over to the right about, oh, okay, well, the Speculator was over there. You can't see the Speculator yard from the memorial. You have to go either up toward the diamond a little bit, or else you have to get past, crawl over the chain link fence and get out at least on the first little tier of flattened, bulldozed material. Or where's the rainbow? Where was Duggan trying to go when he was escaping to try to save his men after they bulkheaded in? Where was he trying to go? Well, underground has certain lifting. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then the rainbow, and I'll show you right where that is right now. It's buried under 1,000 feet of Berkeley pit waste. It's basically right at the base of the Yankee Doodle Settling Pond Dam. It was right in the bottom of Silverbow Creek, Upper Silverbow Creek, right along the stream bed, just on a little bluff above it. There was another little stream that came in, actually from the Black Rock area, which again is completely buried. And so this whole topography of a beautiful upper valley there itself, with a few mines scattered here and there, it's gone, gone. But what I'm trying to do is try to recreate this sense of the place, so that you can actually tactilely feel what it was like. So that's the goal today. So the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to take a little drone flight. Drones are fantastic for actually seeing what's on the ground in a way that the bird's eye eagle view that you wish you could get. Sometimes you get in dreams, but you never get unless you're able to get it in a helicopter or a drone. So let's watch. Okay, so we're starting here, right next to the diamond, right? So we're coming around the diamond, you can see the head frame's down here. And what's kind of amazing here is that right when we turn around here, looking right down into the pit here, the continental pit, right? And so this is the bell and diamond area. They're like 8 bell shafts. Okay, so right here, as we get up a little bit, this is the Speculator yard, right? And as we come over this right here is the old Anaconda Road. It joins this and goes up. That is the old end of the Anaconda Road up to the top of the hill. So now here's the yard. These are diesel tanks for mixing with the ammonium hydrate down in this thing for the explosives of the Berkeley pit. This is the entire mine yard. You can see the Granite Mountain is over here. This was all one giant mine yard. It went all the way down over there and back. So now right in front of that telephone pole is a subsidence. That's where the shaft was. There's nothing left of the yard. These are bricks from the ventilation tower. But see, look at that hole. That's the subsidence. And you can see how close. What's amazing about all this is how close everything's together. So here's all the railroad tracks going over the ferry. And you can see the Granite Mountains down in a hole, right? The hoist house is gone. You know, the last idler tower is gone. You know, everything has been stripped bare, and it's maybe 60, 70 feet of Berkeley pit waste all around it, right? So you can't see the original part of it, but you can see bam, bam, bam. These things, and then the moose was right up here, and the Cora was right over here, just down on the road right there. And so if you get right here, the panoramas that I show you, some of them were taken from right about here. So this gives you just a little bit of an aerial sense about what the layout of the land was. So what we're going to do now is get into the show. So we mentioned the darkness lit by heroes. So this is some of the technical stuff underneath, and then some background stuff to show you how everything was laid out, and to take on a couple of the questions that have either never been answered that I know of, or else were partially answered. And then there's a bunch of rumors which are untrue. I'll show you several of those things and why it is they've lived their life completely separate in the labor history world, and they're pure wobbly propaganda that completely contradicts everything in the testimony and the coroner's inquest. But yet they live on in the experts' books on labor history, used with the Speculator Granite Mountain disaster, used in to argue points about what was good and bad about the era. So all of this really I mean, I can do this. So, our title, we're just going to take on some questions and myths and rumors, and then we're also going to visualize the place. So, and I want to stress, the truth is in the reality and in the details. Fantasy is something else. Our imagination is wonderful, but if it's not informed by the truth and the details of what is or were, then it takes us off in directions that are probably not the best to understand things. So here's the Speculator yard. Right, so the subsidence is right over here next to that little shed. This is the mixing for ammonium hydrate and the diesel here for the pit, Berkeley pit. Everything was blown up here with that combination. You can see over here the Continental pit, and we'll come back to that at the end in something that I'm going to add as my own myth of something I found. It has the benefit, I think, that it has its endpoint is true. It's just the stuff in between 1905 and 2024 that's uncertain. So let's take a look. So this is going to be like a time-lapse video where we superimpose the yard. So that tiny little yard is actually just crammed full of stuff. There's 600 men working. This is on a bright day in 1915, where and the Granite Mountain has already been built, and the yard is at its best and most busy. And you can see just everything's packed in here. There's a little head frame here. It's probably a ventilation shaft. You look at this, or maybe an inclined. I don't think it's an inclined shaft. It's just a ventilation shaft. There are so many subsidence places from the mine shafts that are around. There are 8 different bell mines right next to the diamond. They basically were combined by Anaconda Company until they all went down one shaft. So this is for a little mine that's right above this. It's buried now. There were like 3 little mines over here that had inclined shafts to the highest vein is the Speculator vein. So you'll get the sense for all this stuff, it's just how packed and busy it was. There was 600 men working here. It went from 70 men in about 1902, including Ernest Sullau, who was the guy that actually accidentally lit the fire here. He started in the Speculator when there were like 70 people there. In 1902 as a 20-year-old guy, right? And so all these guys have lives and histories, and that's a fascinating thing for me to try to tease out, is where did they come from? What did they do? What were they thinking? And so there's a lot of questions about that, but I'm just going to focus on these other things today. So now we're going to do the same thing with the Granite Mountain. You can see, that here, we know it's in a hole. We just saw that from the drone. Okay, and so we have maybe 70 feet of Berkeley pit waste here. Here's the Yankee Doodle settling pond. The whole thing out here is just filled with waste. About 70 feet here down to over 1,000 out here. So the long story, or a lot about this, the rainbow. The rainbow is clear down, and the big road that comes down the rainbow is clear out there underneath. So same thing here, we're going to have a time lapse. Take away the Berkeley pit waste, you turn back the clock, and there's the mine yard right underneath. That's what was going on, and that's what you don't see. And so what's the difference between the wasteland, where there's nobody, except this thing sticking up like a shipwreck, to this? 1,200 is the biggest mine in the world, most productive mine in the world, here, and it's getting right into the middle of its heyday. And so the mine yard fence, we'll see in a second, comes all the way around both it and the Speculator, because it's all one mine yard. They call it's the North Butte Company. It's not the Anaconda Company. So here's the 2 panoramas basically set up, right? So you can see it's a fisheye thing, so there's actually a curve in it, but you can see that gives you a good idea. Here's the mine yard fence. Right? So head frame, and they were about 900 feet, 850 feet apart from each other. You could walk it in a couple minutes. There was a tunnel that came under here, and a big hoist house here, which is the biggest, most powerful hoist in the world at the time. 400 horsepower with a 80-ton flywheel going 500 RPM as part of the system. So that's how they accelerated the loads.
4,000.
What's that?
You said 400, 4,000.
Oh, this Larry will keep me. Larry, I meant 4,000. We have looked at the specs of that for a long time. So yes, 4,000 horsepower. But when the flywheel kicks in, that's when they're accelerating the 10 tons of ore, 8 tons of ore in an 8 or 10 ton steel skip, and all another 6 or 7 tons of cable down to 3,000 feet, and they can accelerate that from basically 30 tons from a dead stop to about 30 miles an hour or so within a couple seconds. And it's capable of going a lot faster than that. They can hoist as much ore 24/7 as the 6 or so largest Anaconda mines together combined. They revolutionized mining here, and this is a thing I'm going to come back to a couple of different times in different ways, which is that the North Butte Company was basically a Manhattan project for mining. It was known in its heyday for being the most successful copper mine in history, and I'll show you a little bit why. Oops. So now we're going to take the same panorama, and we're going to just go up a couple hundred feet, and you can see it projected on. Here's the yards. Drones are cool. So that here you are, and you're looking down and you can see, like, this is the dry. These are the ore bins. This is like a little, what's the name of it? A Jimmy car, Larry, where they're running a car back and forth for the ore, dumping the ore in these gigantic
A
bins.
Larry car, oddly enough.
Larry. I didn't set you up for that.
Or a lorry car.
So yeah, and so here's an office building, whatnot, hoist house and so forth. So, but you can see, it's like, okay, well, that drive is right here, right? And here's where the central ore bins are still there. So, you can envision this as, okay, so now what we're going to do, we're going to look at the Granite Mountain, brand spanking new in about late 1909 or 1910, brand spanking new, right? Biggest hoist in the world, they're the dries, they're the ore bins. So this was an experiment with a drone. It's right where it is. So, a couple of questions, I'm just going to go over super quick. You don't have to read them. So, we just looked at the upper part of Silverboat and how Valley and how much it's changed, right? It's really not there anymore. And then the question, do you know where the Speculator is? Now you do. I mean, I'm sure most of you had a pretty good idea before, but when people go up there for the first time at the memorial, they don't have any idea. They're looking around, they're looking for a head frame. And so it's invisible in that sense. So now the fire was started with this high voltage cable falling down the shaft, the pump compartment of the fourth compartment of the main shaft of the Granite Mountain, as it was being lowered. And so I'm going to suggest a couple things from the testimony that say why. Okay, and then where did men work underground? It's a very simple thing, but it's like, well, were they kind of scattered in tunnels and here and there? Well, no, not really. Everything's incredibly well planned out and with massive amounts of labor to do what you want to do, because it's hard blasting and drilling and blasting through rock to make a tunnel. I think Larry pointed out one time that if you average everything, the whole cycle of drilling, blasting, mucking, timbering and mucking, that on the average you go 1 foot for 1 shift. That's a lot of man years. Like enough to get to another galaxy. And in a sense, the underground is that. It's like another entirely different world. Okay, so we're down in the hole. Here's one of the hoist houses, the chippy hoist. And so here's the shaft collars, where the shaft is. There's 4 compartments. I'll show you a better shot in a minute. So the chippy hoist is here. The chippy is the service hoist. It has the cable. You can just barely see the cable coming up from the house. Let's see. It's very hard to see it. And it goes over here and comes down straight into the service or chippy shaft or compartment. So that gives you an idea. And the main hoist was way back, probably twice this far, way back with the cables coming down on the idler towers. Keep it taut, keep it under control. So now how did they lower it? There's 4 compartments here. These 2 are for the ore bins, or for carrying or raising or lowering, what they call the stacked cages. So there might be 4 cages there, each with maybe 8 guys in it, coming up as the other one is being lowered to the shift. So they're timing that every change of shift. And so this is what they did here. And so this is the chippy. And there's somebody standing in the chippy shaft there. They're huge timbers over that, so no one's going to go down that hole. And then there's a pump compartment over here. And this is roughly from the description in the testimony what they described doing. There's 2 guys here and another electrician. The brakemen are doing this 1,200-foot cable. It weighs 3 tons. It's electric high voltage cable that's going down the shaft. This is the typical way that they did it. and it's gonna go to the 2600, so it's got a long way to go. And then it's gonna be brought in, and it's gonna connect their high voltage system, and particularly the fire prevention system, with the transformer that's necessary for all the different electrical work on the 2600 foot level, and the 24 above it, and the 28 below it. And this is the kind of hoist that they put right in front of the chippy. So they took the chippy cable off, and they put it down here to be attached to the cable, the high voltage cable. And then this thing here is my great rendition of something approximately like that. You know, it's a small service hoist. And, but it's plenty good to put a light cage on, a hurricane deck cage, with two guys standing in it, right in here, reaching through the mine timbers to guide the cable down. And the cable was tied, it got lowered at 30 feet at a time at the first, and there was a guy at each 10-foot level tying about a 4.5-foot hemp rope around it, because you couldn't clamp it because it would ruin the cable. So the thing has 10 feet for half the length, so for 600 feet, and then for the other 600 feet of the cable, it's attached to the chippy hoist cable, coming down here from the chippy hoist that I just showed you. It's every 5 feet. And so this meticulously then guided down through the pump compartment, because in the pump compartment, there's maybe 4 or 5 other such cables going with different lengths that'll have to be all wired in the right way into their system. That runs their trolleys, that runs their lights where they have lights, runs their ventilation fans where they have ventilation fans, and then the fire prevention system, which consisted of a whole set of sprinklers at each level having a separate reservoir. So they were trying to make it foolproof. And they put this last plan in detail because of the Modoc fires, which were 6 weeks and about 3 weeks before this fire. So in April, and in May, right before the Granite Mountain fire, poison gas from the Modoc fire, which started from a transformer that was right next to the station. And so the station timbers caught fire and burned, more than 2,000 feet up and down the shaft, and sent all that poison gas out that went into the Speculator, went into the high ore. I think some of it got into the diamond, and they had to evacuate everybody. Guys were knocked out, no one died. But this is a stage for the Granite Mountain disaster, and when people see or hear there's a fire, or they smell smoke, where do they run to? They run right to where they always have run, which is to the Granite Mountain shaft, which is death. And so there's this mindset that's overall a part of this that was all pervasive among the people. It was only the people who could think independently, like some of the heroes that you find out about when you know the story, who could think outside and say, no, it's not that. There's something different. The ventilation's doing something odd. Where should I go? And then be able to know where to go. And I'll show you how difficult that question was.
Just as a point of interest, the Modoc shaft can be seen from the pit observation platform, almost right straight across the pit.
Yeah, I could have pointed that out on the drone flight. It's just down to the right. I'll try to, let's see, I'm not sure of the other ones that I can, but yeah, it's just right down, it's like on the second, or probably the third step down into the pit. Okay, so this is just to see what the chippy hoist it looks like. And so the cable going from here is taken off, a really light cage was put on so they could reach through. These are the doorways, the steel doorways. So there's it's called a hurricane deck because there's a protection platform right above it. And then, but they're being lowered super slow. It takes 18 hours to lower 2,600 feet. And they're going up and down and up and down, trying to guide the cable that's attached to the chippy cable down between all the different pipes. So there's air pipes, there's compressed air pipes, there's a steam pipe, there's a variety of these other cables and other things. So it's not a completely clear shaft, and so they've got to move it around. And you'll see in the testimony here, I'll show you why that's really an issue. Okay, so this is just a little thing by the the head rope man, Ivo Rude, right? So he was the head rope man for the Granite Mountain Speculator. And he actually comes into play all over the place in this stuff, and he's definitely got a mind of his own. He lived over on Zerelda. If you know where Manus Duggan lived, he lived about 2.5 blocks from Manus Duggan, same street. They both worked at the Speculator for about 10 years. They must have known each other. And so he's just talking about how when he was going down to check the cable, he had 2 carbide lamps, and he hung them on the bar in the cage to shine out through into the other shaft, right? And so at this point, you know, who knows what people have been thinking of, but they certainly know that the inside insulation of the cable, which got shredded as it fell, it was encased in a lead sheath, but the lead sheath got ripped off, and so then there was this flammable insulation all over the place. And so even without knowing that, you just see what he says here. He never paid any attention to that case, and that's to the inflammable material, the insulation inside the high voltage cable. He's the head rope man, he didn't pay attention to that, right? Because you gotta be careful to have a light any place there. And notice, he's not talking about flashlights, he's talking about a carbide lantern or a candle. He said, it's a downcast shaft, you know, and good and dry, anything will take fire there if you ain't careful, right? So that's the guy who basically lived in the shaft, one of the other shafts. So now, why did the cable fall? So this is him a little bit longer, a couple pages now, and he says, just all this background stuff. He attended to the bell, so they have bell systems. So the guys in the cage rang up to him, and he rang to the chippy hoist operator that they needed to be raised or lowered as they were meticulously guiding this into the cable down, right? And he says they were given signals to pull the cable up, and several times to pull her up. And I don't know any reason why they should pull that cable up, because I was afraid anyway. He's not going to say it just outright, given that there's this disaster caused by a falling cable, which he was lowering. I mean, as part of a team of about 12 guys. So you see, this end was tighter. He's talking about as you lowered the cable, there were ties every 5 feet, so it was tighter and tighter as you went to the top, right? And if they held the center post and you're pulling that up, well, you pull her off, her being the cable. So if you're pulling the cable up instead of just lowering it, you're pulling it off. It's actually, when you jerk it, or you change directions, the ties are going, every single one of them, the 210 or 250 or so that are up and down that. So if you're just lowering it, so it just sagged, the cable, the high voltage cable is sagged onto the tie, well then it'll stabilize itself. But then if you lift it up, and you have to go up, in some cases 50 feet. And then there's one other further problem, and it's this. So he says, I don't understand, they pulling the cable up. He said, well, it's a first motion engine. And we'll get back to that in a second. It's not the best kind of engine to lower cable on because they can't lower exactly. This guy is not some kind of sophisticated language expert. He's just a man of action. He's a rope man, he ties stuff, he pulls stuff, he puts cables on, takes them off, right? And so a lot of these things you just have to kind of think a little bit, because he's actually saying exactly what the case is. So because they can't lower exactly lower as steady as we wanted to. So they can't lower steady on a first motion engine because basically it's like riding an old, what do they call this, the old bikes, big
bone shaker?
Penny farthing.
Yeah. In any case, when you have a fixed gear, very difficult to pedal evenly until you get up to speed. But if there's any irregularity and you're trying to do this, there's jerkiness to it. So this is a first motion hoist. It's not a nicely geared system where I have a continuous geared transmission in my Honda. You can't hear it switch from gear ratio to gear ratio. It's just continuously doing it. Okay, not so. This is the opposite. So, said I told them engineers several times to lower as straight as they possibly can, and straight means steady here. Because you take the weight on the cable and stop it quick like that, and this, while it has 3 tons on it, it works itself down. And if you have it so you can lower it steady, why, that's the best thing. So the problem is they got a first motion hoist, they're going up and down as they lower it. And at every single time with that irregularity, they're working the cable free. So that's the best bet for what caused the cable to fall, even though it was the same method that was used in every mine that used electricity. So where did the men work? Well, there aren't random veins underground, and it's a great deal of geology and engineering and luck to find out where they are and then mine them efficiently. So this is a rough sketch of the underground there. And it's the genius of North Butte that they set it up this way. Okay, they found a way to gain not just the Speculator claim and not just the Granite Mountain claim, but 25 or 28 at different points claims that crossed the 8 biggest veins from the top going down to the east, northeast, on the hill. They didn't luck into that. They had a very clear idea exactly what they were doing. So this Manhattan Project, the best geologists, the best engineers, the best electrical engineers, best mining engineers, and right up the hierarchy for everybody. You know, the managers, the superintendents, and the vision for this company, which was to take advantage of the richness of the underground, identifying the veins, and then making it an underground highway, efficient underground highway system that was run by the world's biggest and most powerful hoist. And so, see that? No working in there. Guess what? From 1905 to about 1912, the vein, the Edith May vein, the Jesse vein, were these things here. And they had ore from 4 feet wide to 40 feet wide, the whole way down, almost 1,000 feet, in both veins. And it assayed at about 6%, which was great, to over 25%, which was super gene ore, as rich as anything, or maybe half as rich as just the astonishing stuff that was first really gotten into in the lower part of the hill, which went upwards of 50%, I believe, and even higher. So they made mint, as the saying goes. In this era here, from 1905, as they expanded the mine, this is what made them into the most successful copper mine in history. Their stock price went from like $2 or $3 to $125 in that short period of time, and they paid at least that much in dividends. And the owner was busy trying to get the small people, not Wall Street, not like Amalgamated, which was, you know, the head of Wall Street, the Rockefellers, Henry Larson, or Henry Rogers, right? This was distributed to more people. And so if you even had one share, you could make enough to retire on as a working. So this is what that was, unbelievable riches, and it funded this incredible growth. So now, these are just like big blocks. It's sort of a conceptual thing of the ore. Where are the guys actually working? This is a map from the Piper collection. So this is from about 600 to about 1,000. Okay, lots and lots of stuff, color-coded as to depth. Were they in a lot of places there? As you went down in depth, the width of the vein changed, you see what it did. So the Speculator shaft is right here, because the Edith May vein actually crosses the Speculator shaft in a couple of places. This is the Jesse. So you can see it looks like spaghetti. You're going down about 1,000 feet. Okay, this is a little bit higher up, or I should say lower down, from about 2,800 or 2,600 to maybe 2,000. So here's the Granite Mountain shaft, here's the Speculator shaft, and so this is the Edith May vein. And because it continued to depth, and they were still mining that vigorously during the disaster. Okay, this is right in the 2,600. We'll talk about the 2,600 a little bit. And so this is the crosscut coming from the Granite Mountain shaft. And you can see how complicated this is. My God, it comes across this, joins in here, and then it comes over here, but it doesn't really join this, because you can see it's separated right there, crosses underneath this vein. Here's another vein, it's all the red, and here are faults in blue. right? And so if you're working out here, which one guy was, a guy named George Falutovich with a group of about 10 guys, clear out here, you can't get to this, you can't just walk through solid rock 20 feet and get to this where you'd like to go and just pop out the speculator. You gotta go all the way back here and all the way over here until you join back, and then you can come back over this way. Oops, gotta go backtrack, go here, okay, now you can go to the speculator. This is the complex. When the smoke hits, where do you go? Well, vertically, the connections between them are these raises here and the stoping areas, right, where they've taken the ore out. So this is what it looks like. And so my suggestion for thinking about this is, there's a child's game of chutes and ladders, right? It's built on exactly this idea. And but the thing is, in the disaster, you had to choose. A lot of these guys had to choose quick, one here, right now, left or right. Because if you were wrong, you're dead because you couldn't backtrack, right? And so this, and again, other people had more time. Maybe they made a mistake, they came back. But some places, when the fire started, it completely screwed up and basically made turbulent the entire ventilation system. And so it was utterly unpredictable and changing as time went on, as the ventilation shifted, as the fire got bigger. And the Granite Mountain went from a downcast to an upcast. And smoke went racing out into the adjoining tunnels. So very complex, and again, chutes and ladders for life and death. This is just a schematic that I did. So 3 levels, 2400, which is where Duggan was. On the 2400, here's the Edith May vein we've been talking about, right? Goes right through at the 2000. This goes out to the high ore. Next one down, this goes out to 22, 24, and then down here at the 28. Here's where Duggan bulkheaded. He knew this was a dead-end drift, right? And so right here is where J.D. Moore bulkheaded. And he knew that that was a dead-end drift with a fan out here and compressed air going into the end. So he thought that they could survive it. He didn't tell his guys that because they weren't in any mind to listen to that. He punched them out and said, come with me if you want to live. Okay, connections to other mines, right? You can look over here, this is a schematic. But what I just showed you is what the actuality is. So this is just looking dead on, perpendicular to each level. And so it makes a simplified thing schematically. It's like, oh, okay, well, they're connected on these levels. Okay, here's to the high ore. There's only connections to other mines in a couple places, to high ore, on the 22, 24, and 28. And that's going to come into on the 26, right? The Wobbly trial, the testimony of this guy said, I found 19, I was with a group and we found 19 guys dead behind one of those concrete bulkheads that the company put in illegally, killed them all. Right, that's what he testified to, along with a bunch of other details there. There is no connection, but this is just schematic. I'll show you physically. So there are about 380 men underground. You have 11 shift bosses split up, and so they're all over the place. This is just roughly what happened. Downwelling cold air, and you got a fire down here in the downwelling shaft, the downcast. So suddenly got super hot smoke and gas, and it's coming up. It's being capped off as it pushes its way up. The pressure now is greater here than it is there, and so it's pushing up. And so it's capped off, just like if you're trying to make a fire in a really cold cabin and you can't get kindling or paper to get the current going up the chimney. The whole cabin just fills with smoke. Well, that's what's happening times about 5,000, right? And so it goes across the connections and goes to the speculator, which was an upcast. So it's actually drawing that there. And so the men, and then it gets to the next level, and it's part of what's going on here, just like this is. So the men in the middle, in those Edith May veins and the other veins, they're screwed. They got to get out of there fast. So you've probably all seen this picture, right? So here's the drive. We saw it from up above, right? So here's the Larry car would be right there. And so these are the ore bins that went all along here, and then the high ore bins. And then here's the train. So they backed the train up, and they could load it all at once, right? I don't know exactly how long it took. What would you think, Larry? Maybe a minute or something to load an entire set of train cars. and they take it out and around down a hill or around up near the Badger and down. So let's watch this. Where is this? Right? Remember, the valley is filled with 60 to 80 feet of Berkeley pit waste. So we're going to do a little time lapse. We're going to take away the time. We're going to That's where it is. So now, doesn't that change your feel for the place, right? So at one hand, you see this desolate top half of a ship that's sunk. But if you reverse it,
It was a very steep hillside there.
yeah, very steep. And so that's why I'm giving ranges for ore or for waste, right? See this hillside down here, and so it dropped hundreds and hundreds of feet. So that was what was there. And so if you watch these, this is what I'm basically retelling Montana history using this method. I have maybe 1,500 of these things all around Butte, Missoula, western Montana. Because what happens is you can recreate almost in three-dimensionality the old while standing in the new. And it's an incredible educational technique. You start going, when you do this, like around here, for instance, I can just stop at a street corner and the past just appears to me because I've done 4 different shots from this stuff. They're these little vignettes, these little pinhole, wormholes into the past. And only from that perspective. Okay, so we're just talking about the connections. I already showed you. There's a couple to the high ore. They only happen in a couple places. A couple to the Badger on the north side, high ores to the south, and then one to the Diamond. And those are all places where there were people died. But only a couple of them had concrete, the dreaded concrete bulkheads, which couldn't be through, and the guys supposedly scraped their fingers to the bone trying to get through, according to the wobbly testimony. And they're just the ones to the high ore. So let's take a look at these maps here. So we're going to look at the 2600 level, because that's where they said this happened. So the 2600 level is not connected to any other mine. You can see it here. It's not connected anywhere. It's not connected to the Badger, not connected to the high ore down here. It's not connected to the Diamond. So these guys were in a drift right about here, and they tried to build their own bulkhead, and they didn't have the materials to do it, and they stuffed all their clothes around, and the gas got through and all of them died. So that's the unfortunate truth. John Musovich, the wobbly who gave the testimony at the great 1918 labor trial, which found 101 wobblies guilty of espionage, and sent Big Bill Hayward to the Soviet Union to escape. Okay? So there's high motivation for them to defend themselves. And the testimony was used from Butte in that trial for why they were motivated to say the things they did was their fantasy, based on something sort of right. There were concrete bulkheads, but not there. They did prevent a couple men who came back into the mine and found other ways until 2 nippers came through it at the 22 and 2400 with sledgehammers and beat down the thing. And there were like between 20 and 50 guys making it to the high ore. Okay, so this is just the 2400. Now, the 2400 does have a connection. So here's the Speculator shaft, here's the Granite Mountain. This, by the way, right here is the memorial. So you can see it's connected this way. What you can't see here is from the Modoc and the fire there was a raise that was going up into this area here. And that's where they put the concrete bulkhead. And the reason they put it there is they tried everything else, and nothing would stop the carbon monoxide from the Modoc fire and the smoldering after effects. Nothing could stop the gas from getting into the Speculator. And so they put the concrete in order to save the men of the Speculator. And this is the nature of the safety systems, and it's really the nature of any plan system, is they're planned to be safe, but it assumes certain situations, like the gas is on this side, right? And so the gas doesn't get through. But if the gas is on this side, suddenly this is a barrier to escape. Who plans these things? Well, and the problem is that most of them have a door. I think by law at the time, they were supposed to have a door that you could get through. They couldn't put one in that would stop the gas. And so they didn't. So this is a temporary thing. And so the wobbly guys took this idea and they stuck it on a different level where there was no connection and no concrete bulkhead. Just open any later history book, look up Speculator, and if they're thorough, it'll be in there. So this is at 2200. And Moore was right here. You can see it's the same thing, a little more complicated. And on the level above this, or two levels, the 1800, there's a shot from the Diamond to the Speculator. And Con O'Neill went out to change, or to put in a bulkhead, just a canvas one, about 100 feet from the Diamond shaft on the 1800 foot level. And so, as he was doing that with three other guys, they felt the pressure change. And that's because the fans started, probably because the fans started on the Speculator driving big, I can't remember how many horsepower, 200 or more horsepower fan, especially designed to drive, either pull air out or drive it down. And so when it started driving air down the Speculator shaft, Norman Braley, the manager, decided to do that to try to force the smoke to make the Granite Mountain upcast and clean the air out of the mine. He was forcing air in from the Rainbow, which is over here, into the system, forcing it down here, and then pulling it up here. But when he did that, suddenly the pressure changed completely over here at the Diamond. It was no longer a downcast. Pressure shifted, increased, and they just got mowed down by a wall of black smoke and gas that came faster than they could run. And they were 100 feet from the shaft, and they started running to the shaft, and they collapsed after 50 feet. It was so toxic. So Con O'Neill ended up dying, and one of the other, Laurie, I think. And so these decisions that were made within seconds would make all the difference between life and death.
Chick O'Neill's grandfather.
Right, so right here, this is just an overlay of the 2200 workings over Google Earth and with some shafts shown. And right here is where J.D. Moore was with 9 other guys. Here's the memorial. If you walk along the road, there's a chain link fence that comes up, and it's going almost exactly along the line of the Edith May, or the Adirondack at that point. But if you walk this way, north, just along the edge of the thing, right to the edge of the chain link fence, there's a couple of trees there, and you walk over there, and you look down, you'll be looking exactly at J.D. Moore and the 9 guys stuck with him in their bulkhead. So you're actually standing over the top of incredibly profound places. And likewise out in here too. There's places where Duggan was. So on the 2,400 foot level, you can see he went out to the high ore, but Duggan was out here in this. And they ran, and so I've got all the description of where they went with Sullau, who lit the fire accidentally here on the 2,400, and then knew what he'd done and knew where all the men were, because remember, he'd been there, this is 1917, so he'd already worked there for 15 years at every level, including the shift boss at all the different places that had been developed. So he knew that place like the back of his hand. And so they ran down to the lower levels, because he knew the level below the 2,600 had to climb or they'd be dead. And so he went down there with Duggan and Jack Bronson, who was a shift boss, and they gathered guys from the shaft and took them back out, and they climbed back up 400 feet, and then they went out the Badger. this is just a little bit about Duggan. This is where he bulkheaded in. He gathered all these men that tried to make it out this way, tried to make it, out through the Badger, and came back because the smoke and gas and ventilation was all irregular, it was turbulent. They couldn't depend on anything that they'd ever known about where the air was going and where it was coming from. And so he herded them into here. So that's one of the great and dramatic bulkhead stories. And when he broke the bulkhead down, about 36 hours later, he went back to the station in absolute darkness, checked it, and there were no signal bells. Idaho Rood, it turns out, was up about either 200 or 400 feet from the bells, the bell cords, the pull cords. They were probably only somewhere between 10 and 30 minutes apart. And Duggan was just a little fast. There was no way without the bell cord that he could call the hoist engineer up top. So truth is in the details, right? Life and death's in the details. So this is just a little schematic. I'm going to go real quick after this. So this is the 2400, and here's roughly just schematically. There's his bulkhead. Came out here, went back to the Speculator. Then they came out, and went right out here, and then he started climbing. There's the 2439X right there. It's a raise that goes up all the way to the 2,000 foot level, which is this, and then he was going to go out here to the rainbow. So if you read it, somebody said, well, he went to the rainbow. This is where he went. So a little time-lapse thing, just the overlay that shows where he went on the 2,000 foot level, all the way out to that fabled place. The rainbow, because that's where he was convinced that he had to go. He already knew that this had been cut off, and he wasn't going to go exploring to find out anything else. He had no light, that everything was in pitch blackness. Unfortunately, when he was climbing, it's a great plan. He knew the place really well. Unfortunately, he only made it about 100 feet off, halfway to the next level, because there was a pocket of gas that he climbed into. And they found his body 3 days later. He took a gamble, because it was the only thing he could do. So I'm just going to cruise right through this. So this is the Bill and Diamond from the Diamond Waste Dump. It's from a panorama taken in 1912. And again, the then and the now. And you can see, you just get a visceral feeling for how different life is, and the hill is, and everything about your surroundings. You can see the Grand Mountain. Okay, so this is just down a little bit. This is a Speculator, 1912. So right in the middle of the North Butte area. There it is. This is Anaconda Road. Curls around here. You can see Grand Mountain right there. Curls around and goes right up past the Diamond to the top of the hill. Okay, so this just shows same kind of thing. Okay, here's that little bit of a panorama, and here's what's there now. How do you make sense of the past when there's that dramatic a difference? When there's thousands of guys doing all these different things and all their different families, and the bustle and the servicing and everything about Butte is encapsulated in these things. This is the money that drove Butte. All these different things, all across the hill. Okay, I'm going to give you my myth now here at the end. So, this is a claim map from about 1915. Right? It's pretty much the same within maybe a year of all the things I've shown you here. Right? And so here's the North Butte property up on top of the hill. Speculator's right about here, Grand Mountain's about here, the Diamond's right about here. So, when you look up at the hill, it looks like the Diamond's right at the top of the hill. It pretty much is from a perspective, right? So this is all their property. It's about 25 different claims that they made into this spectacular mine. The most successful copper mine in history. And so I looked at that and I thought, well, that's interesting. I thought, well, What's this? Look at that. How about that? North Butte. They bought everything over here on the east side. I was like, well, what's over there now? So envision a time when they didn't make the mistake lowering the cable, right? They didn't use the first motion hoist, they used the other one, and they let it down steady and smooth, and it made it into place, and they had the fire prevention system that they wanted. They were within about 18 hours of that anyway. Imagine that the cable didn't fall. Imagine that Sullau did not accidentally light it on fire and create a cataclysm that killed 168 guys. All the people that he worked with. Imagine that. What would you find? So there it is. I just circled it. So let's just turn the clock forward now. Where is this? They would own the Continental Pit. When I talked about a Manhattan project for mining, they were good enough in 1915 to figure out that this was a prime place to own. 1915. And so the myth is, really, to top it off, how would it be if North Butte owned that property still? And they were the only successful mining company for the last 115 years. And they were still animating Butte. That's my myth. So just a little ending point. East Gray Rock, West Gray Rock's over here. Bell, the diamond, the bell was right over here. They ended up being consolidated as Anaconda property. The waste dump that you see, this waste dump you can see all the way back to about 1910 or even earlier. And here it is. We would have gone from over here, Speculator Granite Mountain, to this holding here, North Butte, Continental Pit. Thank you.